Chapter 6, Retail Pricing for Profit Part 1. There are 9 objectives for this chapter. First, to understand the importance of pricing in the operation of a successful retail business. Second, to understand the factors that affect retail pricing. Third, to recognize the types of price adjustments and to understand the importance of price changes in profitable merchandising. Fourth, to analyze the causes of markdowns and to understand the relationship between the timing and the amount of markdown. As markdown is one of the important factors that affect the price, you will learn about this markdown in this chapter. Fifth, to calculate sell-through and to understand the effect of this sell-through on pricing. Sixth, to calculate dollar markdown and markdown percent. Seventh, to calculate markdown cancellation, additional markup, and additional markup cancellation. Eighth, to determine net markdown. And ninth, to calculate discounts to employees and special customer related to your pricing. So let's look at the overview for this chapter. We will start from retail objectives and pricing. And you will learn pricing policies and retail image related to these pricing policies. And factors that affect pricing and price consciousness, price lines and price zones, and pricing related to consumer demand, establishing prices, how you can establish these, and price changes. So these are all what you're gonna learn in this chapter, and especially today, we'll cover 6 out of these. So you will learn retail objectives and pricing policies and retail image, factors that affect pricing, price consciousness, and price lines and price zones, and pricing related to consumer demand in Chapter 6 and Part 1. So once again, this part also covers a lot of concepts, so I want you to pay attention to this class. And of course, not just for this time, but I really want you to focus on, listening and learning this carefully. And let's start from the retail objectives and pricing. One of the major objectives in successful retailing is to offer merchandise at the right price, because price is gonna be one of the important factors that affect consumers' decision. So if you go to the store, of course, maybe there will be some other factor, but price is one of the most important factors that affect consumers' decision, whether they want to buy or not. And retailers must be familiar with many pricing strategy when providing goods to the consumer, because maybe your consumer have a different needs of these prices and so on. So you need to be familiar with different kinds of pricing strategy, and that's what you're gonna learn in this chapter. And with increased competition in the industry, price often serves as a major motivation for consumer buying practices. So imagine that you open the store, like a apparel store, and you have like a lot of competitors out there, and your consumer kind of go out of this or the store, and price is gonna be one of the major motivation to choose your store or the other store. So that's really important. The pricing and prices will affect this decision, and also that's gonna be related to your sales and profit. Pricing policies and retail image. Retailers must analyze and plan prices carefully in order to achieve a profit. Because as I mentioned in the previous slide, your prices will affect the sales and they will be related to your profit. The right price for a retailer should be a price that not only covers both the cost of the merchandise and operating expense, but also provides a profit. I think you remember what you learned the last time in the Chapter 5 about the initial markup. So that's the way you determine your retail price. You're going to add this markup to your cost. And when you determine this initial markup, if you remember, you have to consider all these parts. And cost of merchandise sold, there's a big cost, and operating expenses and profit. You have to think about all this when you set up your retail prices. And retailers use pricing policies as a guide to determine price level. So you need to know about these different kinds of pricing policies, because you can either have a same level of your competitors or lower or higher. So these policies will be a guide to determine what kind of prices levels you want to have. And pricing policies vary among companies depending upon what type of image the retailer wishes to project, and are important guidelines in determining the types of customer the retailer will attract. So let me give you the example about some retail store, such as luxury store, like a luxury brand, Louis Vuitton, or like Gucci. What do you think about their prices? Is it high or low? You can think that's gonna be high for the most of the customer, And when you think about some, fast fashion retailers such as like Forever 21 or H&M, their concept is gonna be low price, good price, a fashionable item. And their consumers, oftentimes they're really young, sometimes high school or like early college, student, something like that. So depends on the types of image the retailer wishes to have. These pricing policies will be changed. So I want to give you some example about these pricing policies. And let's start from the prestige pricing. I already give you the example about this like luxury brand or like high-end department store. Their concept is gonna be, their pricing policy is gonna be this prestige pricing. That's gonna be above the market price, and they're targeting more high income, level, people. And that can be your strategy. You don't always have to have this like low price. You can target these people with the different, lifestyle and so on. And second pricing policies that I want to tell you is leader pricing. This is something like a brand name, price, but you can have like a low price. So this is also called as loss leader. So for example, in Walmart, maybe you have this loss leader, so the product with a famous brand, but the price is close to the cost. Because the price is close to cost, you cannot make the profit that much, or maybe you cannot even make a profit. But the purpose of this leader pricing and loss leader is to make more traffic to your store. So there'll be more consumers can come to your store, and they can even look at other items by looking at this loss leader first. And third, competitive pricing. These are gonna be the concept of the pricing where you put the price same as other competitor. So that's gonna be at the market price. So some of these like retailers have the similar, prices, but they have to have different idea to attract their customers. So such as provide more diverse, products and so on. But you can have this competitive pricing. So that means the same at the market price. And everyday low pricing is called as EDLP, and you heard that from like Walmart and other big stores, and that's gonna be their concept. They always provide the best and low price for the product. So people who are very conscious about the price, they would love to go these everyday low pricing stores. And high low pricing. This is a concept when you provide a product with the higher than this everyday low pricing policy, but then you're going to have a big markdown to attract more customer. So, such as like Kohl's or JCPenney, they have this price higher than this EDLP, but then they have this like big sales to make consumers to come to their store. So that's called as a high-low pricing. Now you learn all these different kinds of pricing policies. And now we are going to talk about the factors that affect pricing. So what are affecting pricing? You can think about that. So what's gonna affect the price? The first is gonna be type of merchandise. Of course, whether it's a apparel or like electronic product and so on, it will have a different effect on the pricing. And also even just one apparel store, like clothing store, if you have socks or like accessory and like a really expensive leather jacket, this price will be different. So types of merchandise and competition. How many competitors you have out there, and they will affect. Or if you're the only one store carry certain product, then you can set the price really high. Then still people will come to your store, but if you have many competitors, maybe you have to consider to reduce the price. And manufacturers' policies. Sometimes manufacturers, they have some kind of price suggestion or they have some requirement. Price required or price suggested by the manufacturer policies, then they will affect pricing. And selling cost and how well your salespeople sell. And that will affect your pricing. And demand and supply, how much or how many your consumers want and how many suppliers who provide these products out there. That's gonna affect pricing. And handling costs, if you have like higher handling costs, you really have to include this to your markup, so your price will go up. So this will affect your pricing as well. And price consciousness, and nowadays lots of consumers, they are conscious about the price, and even before, but also retailer need to understand these needs of consumers. So retailer must price merchandise carefully in order to satisfy customer and achieve a profit. So you also have to be conscious about this price, and you have to understand the need of your customer, because that's gonna be related to your profit and sales. So what is the right price for the consumer? So you have to think about this value, and it's not just about the price. If you have like a really bad quality product, that's not gonna work to keep that. Your consumers will also see the quality and the price, so you have to think about this value, which is including both quality and price. So if you have a good quality within appropriate price, that's gonna be the really right price for the consumer. So you have to understand the perception about this quality and the price needs of your consumer. But at the same time, also there is a right price for the retailer. Profit is really important for retailers, so they should cover the cost of merchandise and operating expenses. So compared to the consumer, you have to think of the other side of the business, which is making profit. So you have to think about this profit to cover all the expenses and cost of merchandise that you spend. Because if you cannot make profit, it's gonna be minus for your company and it's gonna be hard to run your business. So you have to think about this both sides, consumer side and the retailer side. If you just like a markup really high, that's gonna be good for the profit, but maybe your consumer will not buy. So you have to be balanced to meet the needs of these both sides. And now let's talk about the price lines and zones. Price lining is a technique used by retailer to determine the particular prices at which their merchandise is offered for sale. So if you go to a certain store, you may see some similar, price, that your retailers have. So then that's gonna be your price lining for that retailer. So some kind of predetermined, lines of the price that you have is gonna be price lining. And the pricing structure is related to the buying power of the target customer, who are divided into groups. So these price lines and zones will be really important concept too, and also it's gonna be important for the retailer to set up the price around this price lining. And let me talk more details about each concept. So price line or price point. Price line or price point is gonna be a specifically predetermined price at which an item is offered for sale. So for example, a store carry like a $99 shirt, and most of the shirt is around that price, and that's gonna be the price line for the shirt for the store, or the price point. And price range is the spread between the highest and the lowest price line offered for sale. So store A carry like a jewelry cost like $5, and you have an expensive jacket cost like $300. Then your price range is gonna be $5 to $300. And price lining, this is gonna be the practice of these predetermined, meaning the price lines or price points at which an assortment of merchandise will be offered for sale. So how you're doing this, like deliver this product with these price lines. That's gonna be your practice of predetermining the price lines, and that's called as price lining. And price zone is a series of price lines that are relatively close together and tend to appeal to a certain group of customers. So you can have like a really low price zone and like a middle part, or like prestige, price zone. So you can kind of have like a big zone to determine how you can appeal, how you can attract certain group of your customer. And you have like maybe few different price zones, or like a one specific price zone. Pricing related to consumer demand. Trade-offs may be made between taking a higher markup percent and selling larger quantity. It means that whether you can decide to have higher markup percent and sell fewer items, or you can have a lower markup percent and selling larger quantities. And lower markup percent can be taken if units sold will increase dramatically and expenses will not increase proportionately as sales increase. One of the examples will be luxury brand versus fast fashion brand. Luxury brands such as Louis Vuitton and Gucci, they have a higher markup for each item. So if they sell like 2 items of their product, and they have a higher markup percent on that, but they're gonna maybe have a higher profit at the end. But for the fast fashion retailer, if you wanna have the same profit as this the luxury brand made by just 1 or 2 items, for the fast fashion retailers such as Forever 21 or H&M, they have to sell a lot more quantities because their markup percent is lower. So you can decide either one of these policy, and you can get some trade-offs. And by the way, the fast fashion retailer is defined as the fashion retailer who sell the trendy merchandise at a good price, and they quickly meet the needs of consumer, and they meet the needs of these trend changes. So let's look at the example about these trade-offs. The following example illustrates a theoretical situation whereby a lower markup percent stimulates customer demand and increases markup dollars and profit. The example on the left-hand side, you sold less units, but your markup percentage was high. But on the right-hand side, you sold more units, and actually your dollar markup ended up to be higher, even though your markup percentage was lower. And your actual profit was higher for selling more items on the right-hand side. So on the left-hand side, you sold 100 units at $22, which you get 2,200 as a total retail price. And the cost for those was the 100 units at $10. So you minus that, and you got this markup dollar as 1,200, and minus expenses, and you got this 150 as your profit. On the right hand side, the cost was same, but since you had a lower price, you sold more units. So 300 units at $15, which is $7 less than the example on the left hand side. But the total retail price for everything for all 300 units was $4,500. The cost was same. So 300 units at $10. So you're gonna minus the total cost and you got this markup dollar as 1,500. Your markup percentage on the right hand side is 33.33%. On the left hand side, you have a higher markup percentage, which is 54.55. This was calculated based on the markup dollar and retail. So for the left hand side, it was 1,200 divided by 2,200. And for this 33.33 is gonna be 1,500 divided by 4,500. But at the end, even though your retail price for each unit was cheaper for the right hand side, you had a higher markup dollar, total dollar, and your total profit was ended up to be higher. So this was the example about, you're selling like a larger quantity but has a lower markup percentage, but you still get higher profit. So you can decide whether you want to sell more units and has a lower markup, or maybe you can sell like a few items with a higher markup, but once again, it will go back to your customers' needs and their want. So that's pretty much, if for this chapter 6 and part 1. So you learn about all these like importance of the pricing and objectives about that and pricing policies and so on. And the next time we are going to talk more about establishing prices and price changes. And that's it for today. And let's talk more about this pricing the next time.